Attention crew, this is your Captain Caliban speaking. This is a supplemental episode of Enterprising Individuals, where we bring you news and tidbits from the world of Trek, also interviews with special guests, and a few little surprises along the way. I hope you're doing well wherever you are, whatever your circumstances are, what's going on in your neighborhood. I hope things are getting better for you. It's been a while since we talked about the news on this show, and there have been some big developments in the world of Trek news, so we'll have a news update soon on the show. I'm thinking next week, because I don't want to wait until another supplemental episode, so maybe we'll do a 2.5 episode or something similar, because there are things we need to talk about, so stay tuned for that. If you didn't catch last week's episode, I suggest you do. I was joined once again by New York Times bestselling author Kat Valenti, which was exciting, and we talked about one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, The Game. I always enjoy talking with Kat, and we got to talk about the game thanks to her brother, Nick, who's a Star Trek fan, and he suggested the episode, so thanks, Nick. If you enjoy our show, you haven't followed us on social media yet, why not? You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at EISTPOD. Follow us, join the conversation. You can chat with us live and other Star Trek and sci-fi fans on the Just Enough Trope Discord. There's a link in the show notes. This week, we've got something a little different. Ever since the debut of Lower Decks on CBS All Access, and really for years before that, I've wondered, is Star Trek funny? Lower Decks is, of course, an animated series and really the first expressly comedic series in the Star Trek franchise. And we all know that Data's good for a laugh, maybe Q or Quark, all the Q-based characters. But can Star Trek really be funny? Without Joe Piscopo, I mean, obviously. The creators of Trek, and fans too, myself included, love to tote the socially conscious aspect of the Trek franchise, often citing how important it is from a cultural perspective. But can it, make with the haha? I wouldn't often describe a moving piece on civil rights or the futility of war as patently hilarious. Maybe comedy isn't Star Trek's mission, but can we be sure about that? I asked myself that question, and, I honestly couldn't get a straight answer out of myself. So I went in search of an expert, and I found one in JM McNab. JM is a writer and a comedian. He's worked for the comedy website Cracked for many years as a comedian and an essayist, and is generally a very funny person. And together we tried to determine if Trek, as an institution of cultural significance, has any shot at getting a chuckle out of you. It's a great and, guess what, very funny discussion. I hope you enjoy it. In the meantime, check us out on social media. And if you want to support the show and help it grow, find us at patreon.com/EISTPOD. Grab your whoopee cushion, work on your K sounds, and with that, let's get underway. My guest on the show today is JM McNab. JM is a comedian and a writer for Crack.com and the Daily Zeitgeist podcast on the iHeartRadio network. He's also one of the hosts of Rewatchability, a comedy podcast that revisits your favorite movies and TV shows of yesteryear. JM, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
It's great to have you here. I always ask new guests to the show how they first became Star Trek fans. How did you first discover Star Trek?
Oh, well, I came to Star Trek through TNG. Yeah. I was a kid when it was sort of first starting. So I think I hopped on in sort of like maybe the third or fourth season and then started watching along, like watching it live on TV. And it was a great time to be a Star Trek fan. It was kind of everywhere, at least in my sphere of of like-minded kids. And we would go to Star Trek conventions and, back when they were out in the airport hotels.
Yeah, right.
And it just kind of grew from there. I've watched most of the other series and seen all the movies and everything. But for me, that entry point, those years of watching TNG will always be the nearest and dearest Star Trek experience for me.
Trying to explain to people nowadays the kind of ratings that Star Trek The Next Generation got back in the 80s, like even for a syndicated show, like it's crazy. Like, Dancing with the Stars will do like a half to like 3/4 of what like an average TNG episode was doing. Like everybody was watching it. It had like just such mass appeal. And it wasn't, of course, there's a lot more things on now and people's interests are so focused specifically, but yeah, like everybody was watching it.
Yeah, even like I'm in Toronto in Canada, and for the final episode, they had a big screening at the Sky Dome, which is where the Blue Jays play.
Yeah.
And all these people came in costume and watched. I didn't go because it seemed like a terrible place to watch a TV show. But they played it on the jumbotron there for all these fans, and it was a big deal. Yeah, it was huge.
Yeah, that sounds pretty cool, actually.
Yeah,
I could have done that. You are probably are you a Star Wars fan?
Yes. Yeah.
I'm
also a Star Wars fan, though Trek definitely came to me first. Like I like I said, I watched Star Trek when I was younger and continued to do so. And then Star Wars, around the time of the special editions, I think is when I got into that.
Oh, sure. Yeah. It's funny because, movies have like this, advertising budget and they get pushed on you. And so when I was young, like I wasn't allowed to go to movies until I was somewhat older. And so I would hear about, what Han Solo and Luke Skywalker did this and Darth Vader's doing that. And I was home just watching Star Trek, which also had an appeal, but the kids never wanted to play Star Trek on the playground. They only wanted to play Star Wars.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, come on, kids. You don't want to discover strange new worlds? Come on.
Yeah. It's a lot of sitting in Star Trek.
Yeah, we're just going to sit down on that rock and this rock, and we just look in this direction. Yeah. How'd you get started in comedy?
Well, I started writing for Cracked. Oh, I guess I started doing the podcast first, and I started doing the podcast just for fun, and we're still going. With Rewatchability, people still listen, so we still do it. And then I started writing for Cracked, contributing to it in 2013, I think. And then kept going from there. And I haven't done a lot of comedy outside of writing.
Yeah.
I tried stand-up comedy once, and it went really well. And I'm so insecure that I stopped doing it. After that, I did it once and it went well. So I thought, if I stop doing it now, I'll have 100% success rate. And then,
was this in Toronto?
In Toronto, yeah.
Okay.
And then, I started writing for the Daily Zeitgeist with Jack, who ran Cracked and hosted the Cracked podcast. And
sure.
Yeah, and I'm still doing that.
Yeah, it's, the Daily Zeitgeist is just that for people that don't know. It's a daily podcast that covers the news of the day through a comedic lens, and it's hosted by two people who read the news. But as a writer for the show, what's your contribution to that?
Well, I find, stories of the day. I usually try to find a way in that's a little different than just kind of, reciting what happened. Like maybe it's finding background information or a bit more research. And sometimes I write little jokes. It's hard to, it's a very conversational podcast. Yeah. So like, I think more like when it first started, it was, I was trying to write more like jokes for Jack to say, or Miles. But, and sometimes that permeates through because I can't help but sort of write in a comedic voice, but they do the heavy lifting. I do very little in terms of writing, but they're always very generous with giving me credit and shouting me out. They're honestly, I actually got to meet them for the first time ever because I'm in Canada. Yeah, and they did a tour earlier this year. So I went on the show and I got to meet them for the first time ever, and they just really are not only funny but just the nicest people, some of the nicest people I've met in my life for sure.
That's really great.
Not Star Trek fans though.
Oh yeah, I know. I got to see them when they were in Minneapolis too. And,
nice.
Yeah, the show was really great. I'd imagine that until maybe 20, 25 years ago, the job of comedy writer had gone relatively unchanged since like the introduction of television. You're either a stand-up comic or you're a comedy writer for TV or the radio, or you're writing like humor and satire for publications. And then the internet comes along and totally changes the ways that we make people laugh and the ways that we work in comedy and writing. Like you yourself are in Toronto and you're like, hey, I met my bosses for the first time the other week.
Yeah.
Like it's just like it's totally different. I'm trying to imagine explaining to somebody who works in like Sid Caesar's writing room, like what it's going to be like in the future. And like Cracked, one of the sites that you write for is the perfect example of that. Like the way that it's adapted is like the Darwin's evolution chart where the monkey turns into the caveman. You know, it goes from being like a knockoff of Mad Magazine to a comedy website with articles to publishing listicles and comedy essays to producing sketch videos and long-running series. Like it's, and all in the space of just, you know, like a decade or two.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah. I used to read, I used to read the magazine like back in the day. Yeah. If they were all out of Mad, you know.
Yeah.
What else can you do?
I always read Mad because, you know, like I said before about the movies, like I couldn't go to Return of the Jedi. And so if Mad was doing a Return of the Jedi parody, that's how I would like process and absorb what happens in the movie through the jokes that they would tell.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So kind of weird, but here we are now.
Well, that's the great thing about parody is that like certainly a lot of like adult movies or movies that I wasn't necessarily seeing would be parodied and, you know, Mad and Cracked. And it makes kids feel included. It makes you feel like a part of the conversation, even when it's not something that you're able to digest yet at that age.
Yeah. Terrible example. Like I'd never seen Basic Instinct. I might have seen it now, but I saw Loaded Weapon, National Lampoon's Loaded Weapon 1. And so I had to sort of like track the parody of the joke to like, oh, this is what's happening in the film. I get it. Gratuitous beaver shot. Got it. Content's king on the internet, and it's one thing to have an office of comedy writers or freelancers sending in material, but now, you know, you've got sketch writers on staff, you got directors, you got film crew. You know, it's a big jump. There's a reason that McSweeney's hasn't become the next Funny or Die.
Right. Yeah, McSweeney's. Yeah, I forgot about them.
I think a lot of people forgot about them, but they're still around. Yeah, they're still
totally
doing it.
Yeah, I think I have some like physical McSweeney's issues somewhere.
Okay, yeah.
Probably with my Cracked magazines.
Yeah, right. What gets to me too, as far as like content being king, is that like the internet's like everybody. Like it's not just, you know, there's an advertising demographic you're aiming for, I'm sure, but your online audience isn't like people who have walked into a comedy club looking for comedy jokes or people who have picked up a Cracked magazine. It's potentially everyone. So you can write and shoot, you know, an amazing, funny and clever sketch and get 2,500 views. But two kids listening to Phil Collins get 25 million views.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's you know, part of the fun of doing the kinds of comedy writing I've been lucky enough to do is a lot of the time, you know, you're not writing about things that are innately funny. You usually have like a thesis or, you know, a point you're trying to drive across, but you're doing it in sort of, you know, through the prism of comedy, but hopefully, you know, delivering a larger message. I
mean, are you trying to reach the broadest audience possible when you're writing about Star Wars droids or something like that?
Yeah. Well, I don't, you know, you never know. I mean, ultimately, like in terms of pop culture stuff that I've done, like I try to expand my horizons because I know that, you know, I have certainly a limited palette compared to like the world or the potential audience. But, you know, ultimately, like I do indulge my own sort of tastes. Like I've definitely written a lot about Star Trek and Star Wars and things like that. And, you know, there are so many fans of those things that they certainly aren't out of place.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just writing for pop culture fans and specifically Star Wars sci-fi fantasy fans, it can be an exercise in extreme precision. You know, God help you if you forget which color of kryptonite does what, or that the shield generator was on the forest moon of Endor and not Endor itself. Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah, no, totally. And you know, I when I do get called out for like a nitpicky thing or something on the, you know, for writing or in the podcast or something, like I try not to, you know, be annoyed about that because I feel like I have the same thing if I'm listening to a podcast or reading something and they say something wrong and I have that, you know, nerdy backlash impulse to want to correct it. I feel like I don't think I've ever, you know, written into anywhere or taken that much effort to correct it, but I understand the impulse, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. You wrote recently about fan culture, specifically about Roger Ebert's criticism of extreme fandom. These are the fans who camp out for the movie tickets. They have an armory full of lightsabers at home. And I don't always agree with Roger Ebert. I'm not sure I agree 100% with him when he says that fandom is a security blanket for the socially inept.
Yeah,
but harsh. But I have to agree.
And he was basically a professional fan. Like
that's true. That's literally what he does.
Movies and talking about them.
Yeah, I have to agree that fandom has become an identity for a lot of people in the way that being, a Browns fan or being a steel worker or something would have been in earlier eras.
Yeah, I was thinking about that because I was thinking about my, being a Star Trek fan before coming on the show, and I was thinking about those Star Trek conventions and being like, oh yeah, those don't really happen now, because like the sort of big comic convention we have here is like the Fan Expo brand, which is just like, if you're a fan, you come to this. So it's kind of, I guess it consolidates a lot of different fandoms and a lot of diverse communities, which is great. But on the other hand, like I do in a way miss that appeal of like the Star Trek convention, where it's like one thing. It's in a depressing hotel you have to drive 45 minutes outside of town to. Like there was something like kind of great about that.
Yeah, it's just you and your friend sitting on rocks, steering in one direction.
Yeah, exactly. No, I didn't agree with Ebert on his fandom thing, and also like it was especially weird because it was he went on this long kind of rant about fandom, and it was a review of the movie Fanboys, which was just kind of like a harmless comedy about Star Wars fans. Like I don't really understand what prompted him to be so enraged by it.
He just had enough. Yeah. That movie too, like that took a long time to come out, and I can't remember why. Like they made it. And it for some reason was just stuck in development or something. And then I don't think it actually came out until, because it's about like the Phantom Menace, right? It didn't come out until like after the Phantom Menace.
I remember I reviewed it a long time ago for an entirely different publication, I think. And the story I'd heard was it was about like some friends trying to sneak into Lucasfilm to get a copy of Phantom Menace.
Right.
And because one of their friends was terminally ill and like wouldn't survive until the release. Yeah. And the version I'd heard of what happened with that movie was that the early cut was a bit more like leaning into the sort of pathos of it, or, having it be like a sentimental character-based story, and then the studio wanted it to be more wacky and teen comedy like,
more Kristen Bell in the Slave Leia bikini,
right? Exactly. And then the version we ultimately saw was kind of just like a mix of the two, which is why it feels kind of like tonally quite off at points. From what I remember, I haven't seen it in years.
Man, like fans commenting on fandom and works about fandom is a totally different show that we could do, but not the one that we're doing today. I just want to ask you, like, as a writer for the Daily Zeitgeist, which is, it's nominally a political show. I don't know what your like political affiliations are, but lots of stuff's been happening, in the last 4 years. Is it like a content mine? While the world is falling apart, are you finding yourself with a lot of stuff to offer up to appear on the show?
Some people might find that there's always something going on in the day. It's hard not to find things, but it's also, it's just, it's, I've never talked to the guys who run the show about this, but it's a comedy podcast, but it's also a news podcast.
And a culture podcast.
So it is hard to, it's hard to, sometimes I just step out of the way when it's like, there's news to be discussed and it's very dire, and there's not necessarily a comedic spin on it. But then I feel like I can always find something, a Taco Bell commercial about something stupid that we can talk about for 10 minutes at the end, or something like that. But they do a really good job of finding ways to break down the news. And we also are living at a time where there's just so much news. Like there's constantly there's cable news and nightly news, and then you've got Twitter, which is just kind of bombarding you with opinions and news stories throughout the day and night. It's a lot.
Yeah, I just remember like the earlier days of the show and things like segments like Bloyd Watch, which were fun, but have kind of been stripped away as we enter the apocalypse or wherever it is we're going.
That's why, I things like Star Trek are like a nice break, because it's the complete, it's the political fantasy of a utopia. You can break it down and find, some logistical flaws in the way they present that utopia for sure. But it can be, I found, like, thinking about it now, because I was rewatching some TNG for this, and I was thinking about the times that I've watched TNG in recent years, because I don't watch it all the time, even though I'm a huge fan of it. I think that the times I've watched it most recently are when I've needed something of comfort. It's just it's the nostalgia thing, but it's also just like the space that that particular Star Trek show inhabits is a very comforting one, and I find that I use the show as kind of like a therapy at times.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot. I find that as I watch it, like as the years go on, and we get farther and farther away from the moment in which it was created, I find it more and more sort of jejune from like a socio-political standpoint. And I know that they weren't trying to change the world or start a revolution or anything, but people think of it as being very inspiring and thinking and dealing with tough social issues. And the older I get, the more I realize how complicated those social issues are.
Yeah.
And it's it's all well and good to put a guy in pajamas and have him just talk everybody into agreeing, and then we can just fly off somewhere else. So as Trek has moved into the 21st century, I really want to see it, and we're way off the topic of comedy, which we'll get back to, but I really want to see it try to engage more with these like tough issues, because everybody is much more, I think, politically and socially aware and can handle that sort of thing, and handle, I think, big discussions and tough decisions in their entertainment. Like, they'll go to entertainment for that. But that being said, yeah, I mean, it is nice to see a bald guy just fix everybody's problems. That is nice.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, yeah, totally. I think that, yeah, when you take a few minutes to actually like break down what the Federation is and like how they operate and how they have this like human supremacy.
Yeah, they kind of do.
Yeah, like it becomes quickly problematic, but still it is like, it is a show that can be very just like you said, that things are going to be fixed by the end of the show. I mean, the Picard show was kind of taking things, I'd argue, too far in the other direction, like adding nuances of realism and sort of real world problems, but kind of bombarding the show with an entirely different tone. But yeah, that's a totally different conversation.
Well, it's a Star Trek conversation. So
okay, yeah.
Thanks for joining me today. I haven't had anybody hard agree with me on this yet, but as much as I love Star Trek, I don't think it's really all that funny, at least not intentionally. And I'm not 100% sure why that is, but I have a few theories.
Yeah, when you suggested this topic, I hadn't even really thought about it that much, which is weird, because I associate my life with comedy and being a fan of comedy. And at the time when I first got into Star Trek, like, comedy was everything. Like, the biggest thing in my life before Star Trek came along was probably like Monty Python. Sure. So it's weird that I never really like interrogated that idea that maybe Star Trek isn't funny. And I never thought about it that hard until you brought it up.
Yeah. And I don't know why I started thinking about it, except I've just been doing this show for a long time. And I wouldn't call myself a full-on comedy nerd, but I do like certain comedians and I do kind of follow comedy. And it's just struck me in a weird way. And as a primetime show that's, it's a genre show, but like we talked about before, it's a family show. Lots of people watched it. It had a wide appeal. It has to be at least humorous sometimes, to have that 4-quadrant appeal. But it's not actually like laugh out loud funny, like funny. And it's weird because other genre shows seem to have no trouble getting laughs. Like, you got your Buffys, your Doctor Who's, Farscape is often hilarious. And those shows have drama and they do all the sci-fi stuff. And they're often really funny, and they can pull off like comedy episodes. Like this episode is just going to be like a goofy comedy episode.
My theory as to why that is that the central premise of Star Trek is so kind of silly and ridiculous. Like you said, it's
I thought you were going a different way. Okay, please keep going.
No, it's an absurd premise. Like you said, it's people in their pajamas in basically a living room flying through space and fighting aliens or teaching aliens. And it's so kind of ridiculous when you break it down that the only way that it works as a story is if everyone in the story takes it all super seriously.
Completely straight.
Yeah. So I think that if you had like a character, even in like the original series, who was like the wacky guy being like, what are we doing out here?
We can't be out here.
Yeah. I think that would like burst the bubble a little bit. Like you need everyone to kind of commit to this vision of the future. And I think that I know we'll probably talk about some examples of what works as comedy in Star Trek, but I think the best examples or the funniest examples that I could think of in Star Trek episodes were usually when someone is letting kind of the air out of those characters, or kind of bringing them down a notch just a little bit, sure. Just kind of like chipping away at that sort of stern, self-serious demeanor, if
sure.
that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. That's interesting, just looking at it from sort of like a mechanical construction sort of viewpoint, like having, because one of the funniest Star Trek movies is Star Trek 4, where our future characters, are the fish out of water in our world. And it's like, they don't know what a bus is or
right.
whatever.
Yeah.
But then when you do that on TNG and you bring the frozen people to the Enterprise and they want a Wall Street Journal, it's like kind of funny, but it doesn't play the same way. See, I thought the solution was, or one of them was, that it was a question of tone, which kind of gets into what you were talking about. Like I joke often on this show that I like the fact that everybody on Star Trek is this straight-laced kind of priggish nerd. They're playing the cello all the time. They're reading Shakespeare.
Right. Yeah.
And there's a level of remove to the characters in the Federation. They're enlightened and they seem kind of almost alien to 21st or 20th century humans. They've gotten rid of TV and presumably trash culture. And I like that for my Star Trek heroes, like in their bright future. But I'd imagine that doesn't leave any room for like Alf, or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, totally. I mean, I think the fish out of water thing is kind of what I was talking about. Yeah. That those stories are some of the funniest stories because we're not changing the characters,
Yeah.
We're taking them and putting them in a situation where they're funny to us, but they don't even know that they're being funny.
Yeah.
Like you said, Star Trek 4, like Chekhov asking for nuclear vessels,
right.
or Spock diving into the whale tank. Like it's funny to us because we're kind of seeing it from a different perspective. And I think they do that a lot on all the Star Treks. I think they all have funny episodes or funny stories where they just shift that perspective a little to change the show, but not change you can't change the sort of central seriousness of the characters themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like we don't really know what their entertainment is like in the 24th century because we know they got rid of TV. They've got the holodeck, which people joke about, the kind of things you can do with a holodeck, but I mean, you really could do anything with a holodeck. But we never see like any like comedy shows. We never see any comedians in the 24th century. Like, I wonder if anybody knows what the institution of comedy is.
The only thing I could think of was there's that episode, like there's an early TNG episode where like Data creates Joe Piscopo on the holodeck.
Yes. Yes, of all people. Yeah.
So you can create anyone on the holodeck. He could have gotten the Marx Brothers or anybody, but he gets this kind of like
Carl Reiner. No.
Yeah.
Joe Piscopo.
He gets the holographic Joe Piscopo playing this kind of like hacky Vegas stand-up to teach him what comedy is. Like that on its own kind of makes you wonder if the people running the show really get what comedy is.
Yeah. And in that episode, that's the B plot. I think the A plot is that the Rocketeer is on board and he's this rakish character and he's gotten somebody pregnant or something. So like the whole show is kind of a wash. Before he gets to Joe, when Data's talking to the holodeck, he asks the ship's computer who the funniest comedian is. And the computer says that it's like Stan Origa, who's a guy who specializes in jokes about quantum mathematics. And that's like that's a bleak outlook on comedy in the future. It's a comedy dystopia. Even Data says, that's too esoteric. I need Joe Piscopo.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the opposite of that.
Yeah. I wonder, do you ever see any other examples of like people watching or enjoying a piece of entertainment and are laughing? Because they would do plays on the Enterprise in the Next Generation.
Yeah, but they're doing like Shakespeare tragedies. They're not doing Oscar Wilde or Neil Simon or something like that.
Yeah.
It's just weird.
That's weird.
There's plenty of characters on Trek shows that are kind of smart asses. I don't know if that's like their version of like a funny guy. And there's characters who are actually genuinely funny, like they're meant to be funny to the audience, but they're always characters who are like universally reviled in the show. Like Q can be very funny.
Right.
And Lixana Troy can be funny, but like whenever they show up, all the characters
those
on
are
board
the two
are like,
characters that I thought of with TNG, certainly. And because they're like specifically, opposing the sort of seriousness, like Q, Starfleet's like all rules, right? It's all rules, it's all regulations. That's what's most important. So Q is like this kind of anarchist, who believes in nothing and has godlike power. So he's, bringing that kind of, and
it's antithetical to what they want to do. It's like,
exactly.
we can't be funny. We're looking in this one direction. We can't stop doing that. Get out of here.
And Loxana Troy too. I haven't watched many of her episodes recently. I don't know how they hold up in terms of the humor now, but like that's the same kind of thing. Like 90% of the episodes, the characters are like keeping their emotions in check and being completely reserved and not saying what they mean. And so you introduce a character who can read everybody's mind and says everything that's on her mind, and you disrupt the sort of balance of the ship in a comedic way.
Yeah. The humor that she adds is specifically like violating the mores of shipboard life or 24th century life. As far as I can tell, Tom Paris is probably the main character of a Trek show who's most meant to be a quote unquote funny guy, in the world of the show.
Yeah.
And he amounts mostly to like a wise ass who just makes snide comments about whatever's on the view screen.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess he's funny.
Yeah, I guess.
I mean, but even like his thing, like speaking of holodeck things, like his holodeck thing was like those old timey serials.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah. Which weren't especially funny, but it was kind of funny seeing them interact with them, I guess.
Yeah, it's more just an absurdity, a visual absurdity or an absurdity of having like future characters who want to play in this archaic version or vision of the future, and it's like, yeah, okay, that's pretty cerebral. Okay, I'll smile at that, but it's not like laugh out loud funny. I think that whenever characters in Trek try to talk specifically about comedy, it's not exactly hilarious stuff. They're often talking about pulling practical jokes on each other, and the jokes are just lame. They're just like, wow, you really got him. Like there's a thing where Wes is being picked on at the academy, and somebody rigs his shower to spray mud on him. It's like, okay, all right, that's real conceptual when you think about it. He's there to get clean, but it sprays mud on him. And then he gets somebody back by making some component that the guy's working on spray chili sauce on him.
Yeah, I bet a lot of Star Trek characters think they're funny. Like, I bet Tom Paris thinks he's hilarious.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Or I bet Commander Riker thinks he's funny, but he's not really funny.
And Tom Paris loves, like, the 20th century, right? So I'd love to see him like replicate, comic strip live and then like do an open mic night or something like that and have everybody come up and tell jokes or something. Maybe that's a little too involved, but yeah,
instead of having plays in 10 Forward, they should be having open mic nights.
Yeah, he's just doing comedy night. Yeah, he's got his trunk full of prop comic stuff. I really wonder if it's a side effect of the show's premise. Like we talked about tone before, but there's also the idea that like you mentioned, they're really doing important work. They're exploring the galaxy. They're maintaining this post-scarcity utopia. There's no time for laughs here.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, that's a big part of it. I think I'm trying. There was maybe more of a lighthearted tone in the original series, certainly.
Yeah, for sure.
But again, you have Spock, like the most serious character on the bridge. So like if the other characters are taking things slightly less seriously, it's usually in contrast to him.
Yeah.
And it's not, I guess it's kind of funny. Is it funny?
I don't know.
It's kind of racist when you think about it.
Oh boy!
So
well,
it's just like it's laughter, you green-blooded fool.
Yeah, you son of a bitch. The thing about like TOS is there were a couple specifically designed to be comedic episodes, like The Trouble with Tribbles, A Piece of the Action, and those were pushed by the showrunner Gene Kuhn, who really wanted to see it be more funny, and Gene was like, Star Trek can't be funny for the reasons that we have stated on this show. But there's something else about like the people who were making Trek at that time, like TOS, they were cutting it from whole cloth. Like nobody knew what Trek was at that time.
Yeah.
And so if you've got a writer, he just got off of Gunsmoke, or The Rifleman or something like that. And the way that they pushed those writers out back then is, you've got a central conflict, you've got a little drama, you've got some clever lines and some humor, and that's an hour of TV. And so I think they were just making Trek that way. So there's a lot of great exchanges between Bones and Spock and McCoy, and they're finding ways to, like you said, have the characters bounce off of each other because of their particular traits, or peccadillos.
Yeah.
And I
think there are a lot of funny character-based jokes or episodes. Like I mentioned to you in an email, like an episode I genuinely think is funny, and maybe I'm in the minority, but Cupid, like the one where they're sent into like a Robin Hood fantasy.
Yeah.
In the end, like the way that the crew are trying to kind of inhabit that world is funny to me. Yeah. Worf being so upset about everything is funny, and then smashing Geordi's loot for no reason and apologizing immediately afterwards. Yeah. That's funny to me. I maybe it's stupid. I haven't watched.
I mean, it's an Animal House bit, but yeah, it is. Yeah. It is funny. I tend to think of like that episode as being more silly than funny. Like there's the whole, why would Q make them Robin Hood and the Merry Men or whatever?
There's no reason.
I mean, no. I mean, it's a silly premise, but it is full of like good little bits that are like standalone funny. I was reading an article in preparation for this on StarTrek.com, and it's titled "The 15 Funniest Episodes of Trek." And of course, this is just one writer's opinion, but I was kind of bleak.
Right.
They called out for TOS. They called out Tribbles and Piece of the Action. They did the first episode for TNG they mentioned was Data's Day, which is not all that funny. No. And it's also season 4. Like it took to season 4 before a funniest episode came up. I would have put The Big Goodbye on there, which is very. I was
just going to say some of the holodeck episodes. Are kind of funny.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, again, it's like examining that idea of, okay, these are like perfect human beings from the 24th century. Now let's put them in like a 30s detective novel, and Dr. Crusher, chews and swallows the chewing gum the guy gives her, these sort of like, dramatic irony bits. Like we know more than they do.
Right. It's funny, and it's also, it's funny in kind of an endearing way too, that like even just the idea that Captain Picard, who is this, he's so austere and dignified and literate, but then he also has this side of him that enjoys these kind of grubby,
he likes trashy novels.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of a funny premise for that character.
Yeah.
What else was on that list?
Well, there was a couple more for TNG. Cupid was on there. Rascals was on there, which is like, that's not that funny.
That's what I was going to say, is actually like taking what I was talking about that works and going too far with it. Like it's good to kind of undercut the seriousness of the show to a certain extent with characters, but like that is just such a broad, in my opinion, such a broad story, and it gets so goofy.
Yeah.
That
it's
I
an
think
attempt
it goes too far in the other direction.
Yeah. It's an attempt to be really funny. And it comes off as like, it's cute, I guess.
I think I wrote about this once on Cracked. Have you ever talked about the fact that the kid who plays young Picard in Rascals is also the kid who played his nephew?
In Family. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, which makes me wonder if the show is trying to imply that Captain Picard was secretly the father.
Oh,
had an affair with his sister-in-law.
Oh, I was just thinking it was the frugality of Paramount's casting office, but yeah, that's really, I never thought about that before.
My theory is that he had an affair with his sister-in-law, and that's also adds to why he's so upset in Generations.
Yeah, he's just devastated. There will be no more Picards. Oh my God.
Yeah. Or it's that, they all had Rolodexes and that was the only child actor they had.
Yeah, well, yeah.
I mean, a nephew can look like,
Oh, certainly.
Uncle. That's fine. Yeah. But I like to imagine in my head canon that's what was secretly going on.
This kid's good. He can fake a British accent. Get him back in here. Yeah. For DS9, the first episode that they peg is Trials and Tribulations, which is a season 5 episode.
Oh, and wow.
It's funny, but it's like derivative of, the original episode. And they also bring out Take Me Up to the Holosuite, which, fair play. That's a funny episode.
Yeah, and that's great, like, character-based comedy again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think the problem in this exercise is, especially for DS9, is trying to peg funny episodes as a whole, because there are so many funny moments in any number of DS9 episodes. Any Quark and Ron bit is going to be good, or Quark and Odo, or Garrick and anyone. Like, there's just some incredibly talented comedic performers who are doing great stuff in the margins, but there's nothing, and we're just having a general discussion about Trek and comedy, so maybe here's a big success. But when you try to look at, like, the funniest episodes, not a lot of DS9 episodes are going to be on that list, I don't think.
Well, it's such a grim setup. Like, the setup is they're on like a space Nazi station, basically, and at the start of the show, no one wants to be there. It's a depressing, horrible place. And it's and a lot of the show, takes place with this backdrop of war. Like it's a darker series, but like you said, like, it allows for those moments of levity to kind of bubble up from that backdrop, and that makes it all the more impactful, I think. Yeah, when you have like the banter between Odo and Quark, or any of the, or like the baseball episode is a perfect example. It also works as like as a great reliever of tension. Like I came to DS9. Well, not late, because I remember watching like the pilot when it aired. But I as a kid, I didn't get into it the same way I did other Star Trek. So I watched it much later after it had all finished as an adult, and kind of binge watched it. And some of those episodes are so heavy, like having those little bits of humor or lighthearted stories. Yeah, like really are effective at just like. Yeah, like taking that tension away for a little bit so you don't burn out on anxiety watching the series.
Yeah, and having having a character like Quark who does get involved in the drama sometimes, but he's nominally there as a comedic character. Maybe that forced them to try to think more comedically. So when you're doing your breakdown and it's like, okay, what's this opening going to be, or what's this? We need an extra scene. You're thinking, okay, well, we've got Quark, and we can do. He's having a comedic interaction with somebody. He's trying to bilk somebody out of something, or he's having a scheme that Odo catches him doing. Whereas on TNG, you would just have to go, well, Riker's going to be funny this week,
right? He's going to try to be funny
if we can manage that. Yeah.
Well, I think I was also trying to like put together like a list of what like moments I thought were trying to be funny that don't work. Like how often do they try humor and not succeed? And I would argue, like, Quark aside, because I do like Quark as a character a lot. But I think when they introduced the Ferengi, they were supposed to be funny, and a lot of the Ferengi based episodes, for the most part, I think are supposed to be funny.
Yeah.
And I don't think they're funny. I think they did interesting things with them some of the time. There are some good episodes, and Quark, like we said, is a great character. But I think that they're not funny.
Yeah, I think once you have like ongoing characters like the Nagus, played by Wallace Shawn, or
he's
Brunt,
great. Yeah.
Or like the ongoing character on DS9. But yeah, like Menage a Troy, the episode of TNG where they get kidnapped and the guy wants to marry them or whatever.
Watching it now too, it's especially rough because they're these hilariously like money grubbing misogynists who don't let women wear clothes.
Yeah,
what?
It doesn't. Yeah. There's an episode called The Ascent of DS9 that I really enjoy, and it's the one where Quark and Odo crash land on a planet, and this is where Odo is solid. He's not, a changeling at this point, and they basically have to get to the top of this mountain and survive, and it's this sort of odd couple bickering. They hate each other, but they need each other, but maybe they do really love each other, and they say it's based on I'm Waiting for Godot, famously hilarious play, Waiting for Godot. But that's an example of like, how do we get these? We'll put these characters up on Mount Whitney and just watch them bounce off of each other and get a lot of humor out of it. And that's the kind of humor when Trek does succeed. I think that's usually what it is. It's when it's taking these characters and like finding the little nooks and crannies and ways that they can bump up against other characters, and not just like, we're just doing a bit or doing a joke or something. Yeah,
totally. And that's what the show does so well, is like build up these characters for years and years to the point where you can create those moments like that episode where you don't have to do a lot of heavy lifting comedically. You just have to kind of put them in a position where they're going to bounce off each other in an amusing way.
Yeah.
And an emotional way too with them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Voyager is a series where things get a little weird. Voyager as a show, it had a lot of pressure on it to be a lot of things for a lot of people when it came out. And I think the net effect was that everybody gets a little bit in here and there on Voyager. Like we talked about the seriousness of TOS and TNG. We're exploring this, negotiating that. And I think you could rely on like a character like Sulu or Riker to say what everybody's thinking, have a little, bon mot that cuts the tension. But it's like everybody on Voyager is an incurable smart aleck. Scene to scene, everybody's got a wry reaction to everything. I actually just completed a rewatch of the show, and it really added a lot of depth for me in my understanding of Voyager. I like it a lot more than I did, but I still think that you can go to some of those scenes and just have everybody get up and sit one chair to the left and say those lines, and it doesn't matter who's saying them. It's just all... Everybody's just got a little snide little comment to say.
I never thought about that. I like Voyager quite a bit, but yeah, I see what you mean. But I mean, they're also, they're stranded out in space. Maybe that was their coping mechanism.
It's their gallows humor. 7 seasons of just, yeah.
Well, yeah, I was trying to think about like, was there a particular episode of Voyager that was funny? And I think they're probably to do with the Doctor, maybe because like,
yeah.
Robert Picardo is a comic actor.
Oh, yeah.
And
anytime they give him something, it's great. The only episode on this list for Voyager is Bride of Chaotica.
And that's the holodeck one.
Which is the one where they really dig into the Captain Proton thing and get Janeway involved.
Wasn't there one where he's like writing a holo novel?
Yes.
And everyone's kind of watching themselves in the...
Yes.
Like they're sort of doppelgangers. That was funny, I thought.
Yeah. And I think the one where the Walter Mitty one, the one where he's daydreaming, that he's the captain and stuff, that one is very funny too.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some funny stuff in there. Come on, StarTrek.com.
Just one person's opinion. Enterprise. Enterprise.
Enterprise is one I fell off with. I watched the first couple seasons when they aired, and I've heard, like, I have a friend that keeps telling me it gets really good, and I've been meaning to go back finish it.
It really does. There's an episode that is in the, I believe, second season called Carbon Creek, and it's an episode where we learn that I think an ancestor of T'Pol's crash landed on Earth in the 50s. And so these 3 Vulcans have to sort of lay low and integrate themselves into society. but while trying to get a Vulcan rescue ship or something like that. And it's about how they're the Vulcan fish out of water in 50s water. And so it's not really funny. I'm not sure why it's on this list. It's actually kind of touching, because they form these connections with the humans that they didn't expect to make, but it's not really what I would call like, a laugh riot.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm judging these too harshly. I just have to, lower the bar for such a serious show. But are you familiar with a lot of the CBS Trek shows?
I watched all of Picard.
Uh-huh.
Actually did, me and my friend Sina did a recap podcast for Picard.
Oh, cool.
But we didn't like it very much. So it goes down a dark path in terms of our frustration. But I still, it's still worth listening to unless you like really loved it and don't want.
What's it called?
It's called Tea Earl Grey Hot Take.
Okay.
And,
well, that's great.
You can find it on podcasting things. But I mean, like I'm not so down on it that
sure.
I'm not excited to see where it goes. I think
sure.
there's potential there. But
I
watched that, and I've watched the beginning of Discovery. I didn't super latch onto Discovery, but also like I know they've changed showrunners a lot, so I've also been considering diving back in and watching it all. I don't know. What do you think of it?
I think I don't know if you're going to like what you see if you don't like it, because I think the first season was probably the strongest. The second season is, I don't know, it's just kind of chaotic and they're doing something else. But I thought the first season, because, Star Trek for 50 years was just captain's log, problem, credits, right? And then you do something else. And there's only a slight bit of continuity. And they're getting into this modern way of telling stories now. It's I actually think that like up until the advent of CBS Trek episodes and Trek writer rooms were run in a very particular way, because TOS episodes, they're specifically designed to be, like I said, the way TV was in the 60s. And now Discovery comes along and they want to do all TV storytelling is serial now, even if it's like the Vampire Diaries. There's going to be some problem, but also what's up with the vampire hunters or something. And we're always tracking some kind of thing. And they've had a hard time, I think, taking that on. And you see that in Picard, which is just a 10-hour movie that's just cut off into like 1 hour sort of Tootsie Rolls. And you're supposed to like sort of absorb. Yeah. Discovery does a great job, I think, in having a season-long arc and then also having little standalone stories. Season 2, it's kind of like Picard. It's just sort of breathlessly running from like, hour to hour. So it's kind of rough. I had a similar, we have a recap podcast called Discoverage because we started watching Star Trek Discovery, but now we're covering all the other CBS Trek. And we did Picard, and it was the same thing. You can go from episode 1 to episode 10 and just watch the smiley face turn into a frowny face. Yeah. And like our last couple episodes were just like an intervention, basically. Like what help us? What is going on?
Okay, well, I'm glad to hear you say that because I definitely like heard a lot of the opposite. Like some people who are loving it were not impressed with our takes, but I think that like that serialization, like you said, is part of the problem, because I could see how the story of Picard could work as like one episode, like the 3-act structure of like, okay, you start with this and you go here and then it ends with this. Like I could see the story. It felt very padded out, and that was a show that was so dark in tone and so, obviously very consciously trying to move in a different direction than the Next Generation. But it too had some attempts to be funny. And like there was one episode where the one where they meet Seven and they all dress up in like wacky costumes and Picard wears an eye patch. Yeah. And it's like, I guess this is kind of funny, but also why like he's not unrecognizable with an eye patch. Why wear an eye patch? It's
he was just on like Space Fox News the other day, which I'm sure somebody has seen here, but
Space Fox. That's Space Fox News
in the galaxy. Yeah. I don't know. The thing that I've talked about before, with the characters being sort of strange and godly and removed from like our current time, they're just not going to go with that anymore. That's gone. So like people are calling each other dude, and they're talking about how much they like the monkeys or whatever. It's been hard for me to to assimilate that, if you will, watching new Trek. But also you can't mine the fish out of water stuff anymore, because if everybody is just cool and they all have vinyl records and, you know, their future is just like ours, except with laser beams, you've lost that. The thing that we've been saying is the most successful comedy that you can get out of Star Trek. They've lost that now. So like, what do you do?
You're absolutely right. Yeah, totally. I think that's, you know, part of what's hard to recognize in some of these new Treks. Like we haven't talked about it yet, but it's kind of the elephant in the room is the new one, the Lower Decks
we'll
show,
get there. Yeah.
Which is a straight up comedy. Yeah, we'll obviously get there, but you're absolutely right. Like there is something. I don't. It's weird because so often with these franchises like a Star Trek or, you know, a Star Wars is a great example, because like Star Wars fans are so divided between, you know, trying to expand what a Star Wars movie is and, you know, arguably like sticking too close to a formula. Like, and I fall more in the camp of like, expand it, like change it up, like try something new.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, I find myself with Star Trek kind of making the opposite argument, like saying like, oh, well, this doesn't really feel like Star Trek. And then, you know, but I also want to interrogate that thought and be like, well, why doesn't it? And why shouldn't it take risks? And yeah, so I haven't fully reconciled that yet. Like it doesn't feel like Star Trek to me, a lot of the new stuff, but I don't want to be the guy that says that the shows they like or the franchises they like can't evolve over time. You know?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I'll give you this. Star Trek is funnier than Star Wars. Like Star Wars is not funny.
Right. Well, there's some funny stuff, and
there's some funny stuff, but in fact, they like did a whole animated show, Star Wars Detours, that they just tanked. Like they just put it away, and it didn't even come out. It could come out still. I hope it does. But yeah, like having the characters just act like normal people now, I'm okay with that, because I think in a lot of ways Trek is constantly held down by older Trek. You know, Voyager, I think of Voyager as the first like Trek fanfic series, because it's ostensibly it's got a premise where they have to get home, but it's ostensibly an attempt to return to the sort of week-to-week storytelling of TNG and TOS, but everything is just like a Ferengi thing did this, or a Vulcan thing was this, and they're weighed down. It's like Memory Alpha, the show. They're weighed down by the continuity. And so if we're going to go to a whole new universe where people, like Alison Pill is eating red velvet cake or whatever, okay, I'm on board, because I think that Trek needs to shed its Trekkie past. But I haven't seen a lot really come out of that just yet.
Yeah, that's the thing. If you're going to change things up, it needs to be for a reason that makes sense and isn't just for the sake of changing it up.
Yeah.
I mean, I would argue like one thing that's felt weird for me about where it goes, and I think this kind of ties into the humor that we think works about it, is I like the idea that the ship that's sort of the central ship feels like a safe place. And you can do a lot of creepy things. You can go to a lot of dangerous areas, but the idea of having when I was a kid, I wanted to live on the Enterprise, like that,
sure.
That feeling. But in Discovery, like in the first episode, you learn they're like keeping monsters.
Yeah,
on
there is a dungeon
ship,
on this ship.
And the captain's evil.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to spend 10 minutes on that ship,
Yeah.
So, and even in the newer movies, like the Enterprise keeps getting destroyed.
Yeah.
So I think that there is a fundamental, a fundamental thing about this kind of like safe, welcoming place that you can use as a jumping off point to tell different stories. I mean, you can even tell stories where like the people that you trust are straight up trying to murder you one week because they all like are playing like a sex game that Riker brought back from Ryza. Like, I mean, you can do creepy stuff in there, but I don't know. Like, there's something that's very humor killing about your very environment being unsafe.
Yeah. I do think that really works for the first season of Discovery, though, because there is this sense that, you know, your main character did something horrible, and the arc of the show is her, you know, redeeming herself and then saving, you know, the galaxy. But having the very ship, the kind of thing where, you know, there's a million shots like this in TNG where Picard will, you know, when nobody's looking, will lovingly caress, you know, the railing of the bridge or something like that. You know, the idea that this is our home, our steed, our noble steed, and having like the very ship be perverted, you know, and paranoid and monstrous. It flies on spores and nobody really understands it.
Right.
Like, that's really, I think that was really great for that season. But then you have to kind of get rid of that, and now it's like we can run our hand on the thing and be like, oh, this is our steed. And like the paranoia persists into season 2. Picard is like all paranoia. Like, I'm not one of these people that says that like, what happened to the great vision of the future? I think Star Trek always reflects our times. And so we're not happy right now. And so Star Trek's maybe not going to be happy, but I don't understand like the relentless, nihilism that seems to be present in CBS Trek.
Totally. I mean, I though I do say, like, not to get too political, but like, I mean, there is a kind of very like left leaning idea behind Star Trek. Like, it presents this future where, it's very progressive. Like, money has been abolished. You know, in the first season of Next Generation, like, men are wearing skirts, and no one even comments on it. Like, it's a very progressive thing, and that came out, you know, during like the Reagan and Bush years when that first aired. So I think there is, you know, as much as I think it you know, it's okay to reflect our world, but on the other hand, Picard could have told a story that maybe nudged our world in a different direction, or showed us an alternate version of you know, how we could deal with similar problems. Yeah. I mean, yeah, like Picard, like, it was dark, but I don't know if I needed like an admiral to like literally tell him to, you know, go F himself. I don't know if you can say that for it on the show, but like they say it multiple times in this. I don't want to tell them they can't do that in the story, because you don't want to sort of like, you know, put a ceiling on your storytelling, but it was it was so conscious of the fact that it was trying to be edgy and dark, and
they're watching the YouTube video
Star Trek.
They're watching the YouTube video that makes you tear your face off or whatever, and everybody has to watch this thing.
You know, the other thing, talking about like the rules of Trek and you know, and breaking those rules, like I mean, you know, very famously, like Gene Roddenberry wouldn't let them tell a story where like Starfleet or the government was in any way corrupt, because it would sort of nullify this idea of a utopian future. And like, that's why like you didn't get those kinds of stories till after he died. So you don't want to put it in a box, because we had that before. It didn't work.
I read an article or saw a video or something. I'll have to look it up again, but that talked about how it's like luxury gay space communism, but it's really like a post-capitalist society, like the way we see TNG, and like you said, it was in Reagan's 80s, but I think it's seen as the end result of trickle-down economics and like just following that path.
Right.
And once we have everything has trickled down, and then now everybody has everything they need, and it doesn't at all realistically represent the kind of revolutions we'd have to go through to get to something like that.
Yeah, but then again, like everything will just work out fine.
Yeah, just keep letting us do this, and then we'll all have our spaceships. Yeah,
well, that's what I mean. Like, I think Picard, like, you know, tell a story where there's like a violent revolution. Like do something, you know, interesting. That's not just like everything's shit, you know, everything's crappy.
That's the funny thing, because like Picard takes place, and you know, the whole concept was it would take place outside of the Federation. We wouldn't deal with the Federation necessarily, but it starts with a big thing happening to the Federation. And I know that Picard is, you know, withdrawn in his dotage, but he's still going to care about what's going on in the Federation. And I just, you know, when you watch older Trek, you get the idea that there's just something in the water in the Federation where everybody is kind of civic minded and they're all concerned about doing the right thing. And that went somewhere. And I'm not saying as like a crabby viewer saying, I want everybody to be nice. I want to know, as a big fan of Star Trek and Picard, what happened? Like, why is everybody mad? Why is everybody crabby now? And hopefully they'll explore that in season 2. Who knows?
I think the other thing about all of this, like, seriousness that we've been talking about, or, you know, like the kind of the way the characters are kind of drawn in most Star Treks, like, the other problem with it is that when it generates laughs, more often than not, they're unintentional ones, because it's also a very sincere show. Yes. So, like, when they're super sincere and super serious, but they're committing to a premise that maybe doesn't work as well, like it will generate humor that that wasn't totally intentional. Like when I was emailing with you about the show, like the other big one, the episode that I have mined probably more for comedy than any other is the one where Dr. Crusher meets the erotic Scottish ghost alien.
Yeah. What?
And is brought to climax by an amorphous green cloud. Yeah.
Blazing Bev. Yeah.
Which is kind of amazing on one hand, because like a lot of mainstream Hollywood stories like don't focus on like female sexuality at all in the same way. So it's kind of great.
True. Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's a goofy, terrible episode.
Star Trek was progressive even in that way. I watched that recently just to sort of get it back in my mind, and oh God. But no, what strikes me the most is, like, I feel like the director or just the people in the production really sold out Gates McFadden, because she's really trying. For some reason, this week, Star Trek is going to be a gothic horror show instead of a sci-fi show. And you know what? That's fine. It's gone. You know, we had the Cat's Paw, you know, with the giant cat in TOS. But, like, she's really going for it, but yet it comes off so awkward, and there's such long takes where she has to talk to nobody and knock everything off a table and being in these paroxysms of passion. And it's like, if you just like cut this together a little more, you can make her look a lot better.
Well, even it starts being funny 30 seconds in, because 30 seconds in you learn that there's a whole planet that's just Scotland. Where they just recreated Scotland.
Yes.
Like, that's already funny.
Yeah. And then the old guy who's like, stay away from that candle.
Yeah.
It's just so, like, stock characters start showing up. Yeah.
And she's not even like having this affair with this like green cloud ghost guy. It's also the guy that like she knows about because he seduced her grandmother. Yeah. Which is also kind of gross and funny when you think about it.
It's Dracula from Monster Squad. Yeah. And he's here for your grandma. Yeah, it's just, it's unfortunate. And, this was like the 7th season. So I think at this point they were just like, yeah, sure, just give me what you got. Let's try some stuff. But I don't think that Trek has gone back to... Trek also doesn't do horror a lot. I think we've actually talked about this on the show previously. But it's hard to be scared by ghosts when you can, get a tricorder out and just go, yeah, it's not a ghost. It's an energy being or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I remember being scared by a lot of episodes of Next Generation when I was a kid. What was the name of the episode where they're all having just like weird daydream visions and Dr. Crusher sees all the corpses sitting up at one point?
Oh, yeah.
That haunts me to this day, that scene.
That's a very like stark image.
Yeah, because I mean, that's interesting that you bring that up, because that's kind of like the polar opposite of comedy. Like how well do they do horror? And I would say they do horror better than comedy. Like I can think of a few like pretty creepy episodes, pretty scary episodes, and I can't, off the top of my head, I wasn't able to think of like some really funny episodes.
Trek is one of those weird recipes, I guess, that just does itself really good, but doesn't always mix well with other stuff. I find the Data Cowboy episode just interminable.
Yeah, me too. I don't like, I feel like that episode must have been created by Brent Spiner's agent. Where it's just
possibly,
like, look, the show's ending soon, and we really want to show to producers that he can do other stuff other than Data.
He's such a good actor, and I'm sure that a lot of people don't realize that it's really tough to play somebody with no emotions who's a robot or whatever. And he does that so well week to week. But I feel like I can feel every episode or every season we get an episode where Brent Spiner gets to be a hologram character or play Dr. Soong or something, and stretches muscles a little bit. We have not talked at all about the films, any of the films, or specifically the TOS films, which I think everybody agrees are fairly successful, or fairly funny, definitely successful.
Yeah, I was trying to think about that. What are they? I mean, 4 is funny.
Yeah.
There's that part in 5 where Scotty bangs his head.
Yeah, 5 was really going for it. Sometimes hits. I think there's a lot of funny things in 6. I think there's funny things in 2. Yeah. And I'm not sure if it's just the natural, like, hey, this is a, big budget American movie. We're going to hit all 4 of these quadrants. Like, you can't just have, we learned specifically on Star Trek The Motion Picture that this can't just be, mood spelled backwards is doom here. This can't just be one thing.
Yeah. Well, in 6, there's like a straight up, like, getting punched in the junk joke.
Yeah, there's a nut shot, a knee shot joke. Yeah.
Where, who's the alien who gets, is it Kirk that, I don't know, I haven't seen it
he's wrestling, like a giant guy in the prison that they're in. Yeah. And in 6 is also, like, 6 is about that. I mean, 2 is about them getting old, but they go back to that in 6, that they're getting old. And it's not afraid to, poke holes in the myth of Captain Kirk, or just that the fact that they're these amazingly accomplished guys, but they're still just, people, basically.
Yeah. 6 is about how Kirk is crazy racist.
Yeah, apparently, we didn't know this. I mean, I know that, like, Klingons killed his kid, but geez.
That's like Liam Neeson logic. Like, this Klingon didn't kill your kid.
I want you to listen to me. Yeah.
Don't be a jerk about it.
You mentioned it before. I think we should probably talk about it because it's really the most Trek-focused comedy thing that I can think of right now. That's, of course, the premiere of Lower Decks. I was researching for this show, and I was trying to Google and search for Star Trek comedy, Star Trek funny. And I got to say, the last year or so, it's been really tough to search for funny things that are Star Trek that don't have to do with Lower Decks. It's all lowered. All the search results are Lower Decks at this point. Interestingly, Googling specifically, in quotes, Star Trek is not funny, gives you exactly 2 results. One is from a review of the shooting script for the pilot of Enterprise. The guy just didn't like it. And the other is it's a Google Books link from a self-help essay that starts rating the humor in different sci-fi series for some reason. It's only 33 pages long, but apparently there was enough room to just opine on the hilarity of different sci-fi series. So, yeah, people are the conversation in Star Trek about comedy is currently focused on Lower Decks. Did you get to see the pilot of Lower Decks?
I did. Yeah, I did watch that. I mean, it's hard to judge from one episode. Like, I kind of want to see where it goes, and I'll keep watching it. But it definitely was a weird mesh. Like it feels like a lot of kind of Star Trek parodies, or kind of like lighthearted parodies, like a Galaxy Quest, type of thing, like a loving, bit of fun. But it was weird to see it like operating inside of the Star Trek franchise.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
Yes.
Like that felt like a weird fit to me, because it completely jettisons that thing we were talking about that has so defined Trek, which is that sense of like everything is serious and everything is dignified, which I understand is like the premise of the show is like, these are the people that you don't see during all that. Like these are the people working behind the scenes while the sort of captains and everybody are having those moments of self-seriousness. But but having it be like an official Star Trek thing is a bit weird.
Yeah, we covered this on my on Discovery as well. I was not really impressed with the first episode. And I just chalked it up to, it's just not my style of humor. Yeah. And I couldn't really put my finger on it. And I was reading an interview with Mike McMahon, and series star Tawny Newsome that was on CNET. And in it, they're talking about the process of writing the show and how they approach it. And there's an interchange between McMahon and Newsome, and he asks her, what's our number one rule when we're writing for Star Trek? We're doing Star Trek jokes. And the answer to that question was, we don't punch down on Star Trek, which blew me away because Star Trek is one of the longest running sci-fi franchises in history. Everybody knows Star Trek phasers, beam me up, Scotty. And their philosophy is that Trek is too sacred of a cow to take a few chunks out of. Like that colored everything for me. It's like, oh, yes, of course. This is what JM was saying. They're doing this in-house. There's no way for them to go to the length of a Galaxy Quest, or even what they did in Star Trek VI, where they sort of try to deflate the myth of the Enterprise crew. Like, that's the problem.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, it feels like it's a parody of, but it's a parody of something that it's trying to be an extension of. So it can't I get why that's frustrating, and that why it will probably lead to a less funny show. But I think that, if they did that, like if they took shots at Star Trek, if they actually satirized what is when you break it down a very goofy setup that can be very easily picked apart if you take the time. Like if they do that, they kind of like sever their own, they sever a part of themselves because they're trying to be a new Star Trek show. I don't know. It's a weird thing that it even exists. I was certainly surprised that they were doing it. I mean, not that they're doing an animated show. I they did obviously like the original one, but that was not a comedy in the way that this is. This has more like that modern sensibility. I mean, I was kind of like you were talking about with some of the other newer shows. I was kind of weirded out by the characters talking in this like very modern way, or just like they're just I don't know. It's hard to put your finger on, but it certainly felt like it was aggressively trying to be not Star Trek while being Star Trek. And I don't know if they're going to totally pull it off, but I'll keep watching and see.
I think it's going to be tough to do if they're not willing to make fun of themselves. I mean, I think back to like, and this is going way back, but like Belushi, playing Shatner on SNL. And just the way that those skits, just sort of cut into what is, it's a premise that you can take shots at it. I don't think the bubble's so thin that it'll pop immediately. And
have you read the comic Chief O'Brien at Work?
Yes, I have.
That's, if people haven't read that, they should go check it out. It's John Adams is the cartoonist, I think. But that's a great one because it's obviously like a loving kind of sort of parody, but it's picking apart the logic of the show, because the kind of whole basis of it is on Next Generation, Chief O'Brien's job entirely consists of standing at one console in a windowless room all day, just in case someone has somewhere to go. His life must be super depressing. And, and that works because it's doing what perhaps Lower Decks won't, which is actually like interrogate like the ridiculousness of Star Trek when you think about it.
Yeah. So where does that leave the Orville? Are you a fan of the Orville?
I've watched like maybe one episode, and I think I watched the first episode and was surprised that, I mean, I don't like Family Guy very much. So I wasn't watching it as a Seth MacFarlane fan. I was watching it as a Star Trek fan who was curious about it. Yeah. And I was certainly surprised, like I think a lot of people were, by how little of a comedy it was and how much it was trying to be sort of a kind of funny version of
That's disappointing to hear, because I haven't seen it at all, just because I'm doing a Trek show, also not really a Family Guy fan, so I figure, what's the point? And now that I've been confronted with, Trek has got a brand new comedy bag, I thought maybe I should check out what the opposition or the competition is doing. But to hear, and I have heard this comment before, to hear that it's kind of funny, but it's really just like them TNG drag. That's a real drag. I mean, can anybody do Star Trek comedy now? If Trek can't do it and Seth MacFarlane can't do it, I mean, Galaxy Quest did it.
Yeah, but I don't know how Galaxy Quest did it, but it was also like the behind the scenes of Star Trek is funny, and that was so much about like behind the scenes actors and drama and stuff. Like I remember going to see Shatner at a Star Trek convention when I was a kid, and like he told funny stories. He talked about how they all hated each other. He talked about how I think it was DeForest Kelley's dog ran into a sprinkler head and died.
What?
And yeah, I looked this up like years later, and he told the story somewhere else, so it's true. I didn't misremember this, but DeForest Kelley's dog ran into a sprinkler head, I guess was like concussed, and died. And he came to work and told everybody that story, and William Shatner laughed. And he said DeForest Kelley didn't talk to him for like a year off camera after that.
My God.
So like, I mean, that like the idea that behind Star Trek is funny. Like it's this show about friendship and about like the idealism of the human race, but behind the scenes, like everyone hated each other. They were always like arguing over contract. I mean, that was I wrote a thing on Cracked once about the making of Star Trek V. Like that, I'm sure you know this, but like the reason why William Shatner directed that was just because Leonard Nimoy directed 4, and like during the series they had a stipulation in the contract that everything Leonard Nimoy got, he also got. So he
down to the
he was
lines.
contractually obligated to make a Star Trek movie because they were so like petty and ridiculous behind the scenes. So I think Star Trek behind the scenes is hilarious, and I think Galaxy Quest tapped into that. I don't know. Have you seen the movie The Captains, the documentary?
Yeah.
That I think that's a hilarious movie. That movie is so funny to me.
Maybe that's their next step. Maybe CBS can do a, shit my dad says, but, from an old Captain Kirk's perspective, from like William Shatner's perspective or something.
William Shatner is funny. Like he's probably a terrible person and not very nice. But he's like hilarious. Like that movie, like there's a scene, it's so unintentionally funny. There's a scene where like he wants to get a shot because he directed it of him like mulling over like the big questions in life. So he shoots a scene of him like on the mountain. Yeah. Well, he's like looking at like ducklings or something.
Okay. Like there's a video that's where he's like talking about, because there's the scene in Star Trek V where they climb up Yosemite or whatever, and he's shooting this scene with the mountain in the background. He's talking about climbing rocks and he's going to make love to the mountain and sort of thing. And it's just like, this guy is high on his own supply.
Oh yeah. And every story you hear, I think on Star Trek Generations, like the whole reason why there's that horseback riding scene was like part of the deal for him coming back to do that story was that they had to shoot it on his ranch and rent his horses from him. But yeah, the Captains feels like a mockumentary that just happens to be real. Like there's another scene where he's interviewing Kate Mulgrew and she's saying like, oh, it's really hard to be making Voyager because, it was like every day, long hours. And I was like a new mother. It was hard to be away from your kids. And he's like, totally. And he's like, it makes you wonder how women can be politicians. And she's like, what? like he takes these weird, like old man left turns in his interviews. And he's also clearly so bothered because he's, for people that don't know, he's interviewing all the Star Trek captains.
Yeah.
So he's like he sits down with Scott Bakula and it goes long. So they like go out for tacos. Like he takes all this time interviewing everybody.
Yeah.
And then he's clearly still bent out of shape that they recast Kirk. He spends like maybe 40 seconds interviewing Chris Pine.
God.
It's amazing. It's an amazing movie. And then Avery Brooks is on kind of a whole other planet.
Yeah.
This interview. So it's funny. It's more funny than anything in Star Trek, but it's funny because some of the people involved with Star Trek are funny.
Yeah, The Simpsons has made a lot of work out of that, having like people appear as themselves, and then boiled down to a couple comedic lines that exploits their persona or something like that. Like I wish they could do something like that on Lower Decks.
Yeah, or Futurama is the Star Trek episode of Futurama is great because I think part of it is like so much of it is the the perspective of being a Star Trek actor and dealing with fans to a certain extent. That's another famous Star Trek humor moment, or like a landmark Star Trek moment that involves humor, was when Shatner hosted SNL and, did the Star Trek convention scene where he says, get a life or whatever to John Lovitz or whoever it was.
I could write like a thesis about that, because it's just, that was the message. Clearly it was a personal message, but I'm sure as SNL writer put it in his mouth, it's sort of like this last weak shot at the tsunami of fandom that we spoke about previously that was coming. And of course, nobody did get a life. And now many of us are making our lives out of not having lives. And so it's just a weird cultural moment. And it's funny that as far in the other direction as we went as a society from what he was suggesting, then he released a book called Get a Life, and it just turned into a whole thing. So I mean, right there, like that's kind of Star Trek, or at least the face of Star Trek, kind of making fun of Star Trek. I just wish that Lower Decks could embrace that more, but it doesn't seem like that's going to be a thing.
Yeah, I mean, who knows where they could go? But
there's a lot of there's a lot of places.
I agree with you. Yeah, it feels like there's no bite to it yet. There's not enough there to be like an engaging Star Trek story, and it's so short. It's like 22 minutes, but there's also not enough like not enough edge to feel like a satirical comedy. I mean, there were a couple of other things I had on my list of sort of unintentionally funny outside of the world of Star Trek things. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen do you remember the Star Trek, I think it was called the Star Trek Adventure at Universal Studios. It was an attraction. I never went to it, but it was an attraction at Universal Studios where they basically used green screen technology blue screen technology.
Yeah. I had a friend that did that. Yeah.
You'd go in with your family and they'd give you all Star Trek uniforms.
Yeah,
and I guess they had like, the captain's chair and everything. And you go in and you sit there and they feed you lines. So you have a stand up with the Klingons, and they also put like Kirk and McCoy, the actors are in there interacting with them.
Yeah.
And so and then at the end of it, they give you a tape of like your family in a Star Trek scene. And there's tons of them on YouTube, and they're all hilarious because it's all some awkward 13-year-old kid and his parents doing lines with William Shatner. Yeah. It's so awkward and cringy, but amazing. And I just find them hilarious.
I remember that one of my actor friends went to Universal for vacation and did his, and like he was like really on like all the beats and stuff like that. And it was like, so I was like, wow, that's really great. But now that I know that there are awkward ones on YouTube, I've got to check that out.
It's so good. The other awkward ththing on YouTube that every Star Trek fan should watch is the sort of infomercial thing that Jonathan Frakes did in character as Riker for like a software company.
Yes.
Did you see that? Yeah.
Yes.
That is also hilarious.
There's one where, I'll put links to these in the show notes too, if I find them. There's one where it's the first time that TNG was coming out in like 2-episode VHS packs. So the first season's coming out, and they're doing a commercial that's ostensibly set at like a Star Trek con, but these people are clearly all actors. And so they're like, tell me more. And it's like, oh, do they have my favorite episode? Code of Honor? Code of Honor is nobody's favorite episode. Come on, man. That's not. Who wrote this script? Come on. And there's like one black guy, and he's like, Captain Picard is my man.
Right.
Pretty rough.
Yeah. There's something also, something funny about Star Trek fans. And, like, I mean, and I say that as a Star Trek fan, but the movie Trekkies, I think, was criticized for being punching down a little. Yeah,
like, see, that's punching down. Yeah, attacking the fans is punching down.
I saw on Kijiji recently a guy selling. He had like every, because you could buy, if you ordered them from like a catalog, you could get every episode on VHS of Next Generation, and he did that, and he had every episode of Next Generation on VHS, and I think he wanted, it was like $500 or something. God, that'd be a lot. And he was like, this was like, over 5,000 when I bought them in 1991, so I'd like at least 500 or something. It's like, man, it's 2020. Like I have all of them on
VCR.
Blu-ray, and I got it for like $80.
Yeah.
And they're all on Netflix. But that was funny to me. It was funny to me.
Try the Smithsonian.
Yeah. And, like, I don't want to make fun of anyone's passion, but sometimes when people are passionate about something that is objectively funny, that can be humorous. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm passionate about it too. But it's funny that the devotion of buying every VHS tape for an insane amount of money. Yeah. Which I can understand. I probably would have done the same if I had the money at the time. But then too, like, thinking that they against all like common sense and reason, thinking that they should still get like a fair amount of money for it 30 years later because they spent so much money, even though technology has completely rendered that useless. Yeah, that's funny to me. So there's a lot of funny things around the idea of Star Trek, but maybe the reason why that is the case is because Star Trek itself isn't that funny.
I think the machinery behind, I can't remember what Alex Kurtzman's Secret Hideout is, his production company that's sort of, overseeing all of this. I think the machinery that exists there can't handle and is not interested in doing something like that because you see Star Wars has like Star Wars Celebration, and they have all these events all the time. And I think Disney understands the passion of the fans and their connection to the material. So you often see, behind the scenes stuff and people talking about how much they like it. And I don't feel like Star Trek does that really at all. But I think if you're looking for shows for CBS All Access, a CBS All Access reality show, like Star Trek reality show where we talk to fans and people talk about their experiences and interview people, that'd be a great idea and include, all this kind of wacky, goofy stuff that you're talking about. But I don't think that'll happen under this regime.
Yeah. I mean, that's like the problem with Trekkies was like Trekkies, the movie was like mostly like, hey, look at these dum-dums who like take this too far. But like I think Shatner actually like at least hosted one that was about was a documentary just about like the people who were inspired to go into the sciences and actually make contributions to the world because of Star Trek. Totally. Like we should see all sides of that spectrum. But that's also like that can be funny too. Like, wow, it would be really funny if someone cured cancer because they were inspired by something they saw in the Dr. Crusher ghost sex episode. that would be both amazing and super funny to me.
That would be a front page story for any newspaper in the world, I think. Yeah. I don't think there's any way to organically put this in, but I was going to mention that Star Trek has had a lot of people on who are known for comedy. They've had like comedians on, people like Andy Dick, Jason Alexander, Michael McKean. I mean, Whoopi Goldberg is the bartender. And yet every time they put comedians on, they're not funny. In fact, they're almost specifically put in like non-funny roles. Like Michael McKean was the scary clown on Voyager. Yeah. And Jason Alexander is this guy who's just this emotionless guy who steeples his fingers all the time. And so I wonder why you bring a comedy guy on, you don't have them do like comic stuff. They did that with Joe.
That's true.
They did that with
Joe Piscopo, yeah. The funniest man in the world.
Yeah, well, JM, thanks so much for joining me today to talk about Star Trek and comedy.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Let people know where they can find you online.
You can find me on Twitter at JM McNab again. You can, hear the podcasts that I co-host where we rewatch movies and TV shows. It's called Rewatchability. There's tons of episodes of that. You can find that, anywhere you find podcasts. And, crack.com, still have writing up there. And, the Daily Zeitgeist, is every day or every weekday, I guess.
Yeah.
There's a lot of it. You can check it out.
Thanks again for joining me.
Yeah. Thanks so much.